Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We're going to get started. My name is Mark DePlacido. I'm the current Vice President of the program, and I'd like to invite you all to our firing line debate on the war on drugs. I have a couple parts of my announcement, but I want to start by telling or reminding you all of who we are and what we do on campus. The Buckley program was founded in 2010 by a group of Yale undergraduates under the guidance of Professor Donald Kagan to promote intellectual diversity at Yale. We believe that ideas have consequences and that genuine intellectual diversity is essential for advancing critical inquiry and avoiding ideological complacency. Our hope is that by providing a home to a diverse collection of serious conservative thought, we can provide a forum for Yale students to consider and examine a range of political philosophies that they are rarely exposed to. Over the last few years, the Buckley program has routinely offered a dynamic speaker series, funded summer internships, debates between prominent public figures, day-long workshops and seminars, student trips, and annual conferences on major works of modern American conservative thought. Our guests span from Dr. Henry Kissinger to former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich to activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Students in the audience should note that applications to be a fellow of the Buckley program are due tomorrow, October 15th. Applications can be found on our Facebook page or on our website. You should also note that we are having another annual essay contest this year. The deadline for that is this Saturday, October 18th at 5 p.m. The theme of our essay is James Burnham's Suicide of the West, which will also be the theme of our annual conference this November. Top prize is $1,000, so there's a great incentive for people to try to write, and the word limit is only 700 to 900 words. So also look for that on our Facebook page and on our website. Now to get on to the main event and to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Sally Satel. She's currently a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a staff psychiatrist at a local methadone clinic in Washington, D.C. She was an assistant professor of psychiatry at Yale University from 1988 to 1993 and remains a lecturer at Yale. From 1993 to 1994, Dr. Satel was a Robert Wood Johnson Policy Fellow at the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee. She's written widely in academic journals on topics in psychiatry and medicine and has published articles on cultural aspects of medicine and science in numerous magazines and journals. She's also testified before Congress on veterans issues, mental health policy, drug courts, and health disparities. Dr. Satel is author and co-author of several books, including Drug Treatment, The Case for Coercion, PCMD, How Political Correctness is Corrupting Medicine, One Nation Under Therapy, and The Health Disparity Myth. She also edited the book When Altruism Isn't Enough, The Case for Compensating Kidney Donors. Her most recent book, Brainwash, The Seductive Appeal of Mindless Neuroscience, was a finalist for the 2013 Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Science. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Sally Satel.
Thanks, Mark. Great introduction. Well, welcome to the William F. Buckley debate on drug legalization. Should we or shouldn't we? As you know, William F. Buckley was no champion of what we call the war on drugs. Now, I know the war on drugs is an exhausted metaphor at this point, but it is an apt way, and so he thought, to describe his disdain for policies marked by state intrusion at great cost to taxpayer. At the same time, Buckley was no fan of drugs. Except for wine, I don't think he used much. And in fact, he thought that drugs were a mechanism for escapism, and not in a good way. He felt that reality and presence of mind were essential to civil society. And he felt that drug use was also potentially dangerous to the user and his or her family and to the community. But still, on February 12, 1996, in the pages of the National Review, he proclaimed that the drug war is lost, his words. And his was essentially a utilitarian analysis, that the damage exceeded the benefits. And this led him to become an advocate for legalization of all drugs. Now, in 1996, even I suppose in 2012, the possibility of legalizing use and commercializing sales, even of marijuana, was literally a pipe dream. But now this is happening in Colorado and Washington. And on November 4th in DC, which is where I live, we'll be voting on a variant of legalization, no commercialization, but personal use and some capacity to grow one's own in Alaska, other places. And it's a very interesting time. So we're all familiar with the competing imperatives of this debate. The autonomy issue, of course. Shouldn't responsible people be able to use and do what they'd like? The public health concern, mainly about the children, but that's not a trivial concern about the, again, what sounds like a cliche but isn't, the message that these sorts of initiatives send, and also whether or not teen use will increase. These are all reasonable concerns. Drug driving, addiction going up, and of course the law and order costs that are both human and financial. Incarceration, black markets, just enormous, an enormous plethora of so many sides to this. And it's true, as someone said, there is no one question, should we legalize drugs? It's a lot of separate questions, interrelated but discrete questions as well. But of course, different people assign different values to the risks of moving policy in either direction. And as I said, until about 2 years ago, this kind of debate is a topic that was based almost exclusively on intuition or ideology or principle, maybe historical examples, like what happened during Prohibition, international comparisons, you know, what they're doing in the Netherlands. But never before did we have really good, or I should say, I don't think we have enough, but we have real data from this country, and with respect to truly liberalized marijuana policy. And to the extent that we can use real information this time, as I said, 3 years ago we'd really be arguing principles, but now we can be arguing experience, is important. Of course, our two speakers will basically take the side of, I think, one, I think Governor will talk about how we can improve our system in the context of what we're learning, and Dr. Sabet will talk more about maybe how we should retrench in face of what's happening. But in either case, their perspectives are going to be fascinating, and this is going to be, I think, a very interesting and lively discussion. So let me start by introducing Governor Gary Johnson, who is going to go first because we decided that. And he is a former Republican governor of New Mexico from 1995 to 2003, in which a common sense business approach was his basic platform. In 2012, and I should say these are very abbreviated introductions. They are in their glory on your emails where they've been sent to you, I know, ahead of time. In 2012, Governor Johnson was a candidate, a libertarian candidate for the presidency, and he gained more votes than any other libertarian candidate in the history of this country. 3 years earlier, in 2009, he formed a nonprofit called Our American Initiative, which promotes fiscal responsibility, limited government, and civil liberties. And of course, in that spirit, for quite a long time, he's been an advocate for legalization of all drugs, not just marijuana. I think that's an accurate portrayal.
Actually not, but it's okay. That's
well, definitely marijuana. I think that's fair to say.
right, and the world would be a much better place if we legalized all drugs tomorrow, but realistically that's not
Okay,
quite
fair enough, fair enough. And also, this I did not know this about you, Governor Johnson is an incredible athlete. He climbed the highest peaks on 5 of our 7 continents. Oh, there was another. You have to update your bio. And participated in the Hawaiian Ironman Triathlon Championships several times. And this one kills me, the Bataan Memorial Death March. It almost killed you, I'm sure. A 25-mile desert march with a 7,000-pound backpack. And I think that finally, that will prepare you for this debate, clearly. And then Kevin Sabet.
Well, I can't compete with that,
Yeah.
so I think you should just stop.
That's tough. I have something hopefully charming to say about you as well. Director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida, a PhD in social policy from Oxford, where he was a Marshall Scholar. For the past 18 years, Kevin has been involved in drug policy, and I only half hesitate to say that you're a ubiquitous talking head on television, usually against, I shouldn't say usually, pretty much against the liberalization of marijuana laws. He's worked at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, otherwise known as the Drug Czar, for a period of from 2000 to 2011 with a few breaks, but many years, and that meant he served all presidents from Clinton, Bush, and Obama. Then the day after Colorado voted for its marijuana laws in 2012, he became the co-founder of something called Project SAMS, which stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana, along with Representative Patrick J. Kennedy. The philosophy of Project SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, is basically to reject the extremes. On the one hand, not to lock them up, but on the other hand, not to go all out liberalization. Basically, amend it, don't end it approach. So with that, the way this is, we're going to be here for another hour till about 5:15, and we're going to start with Governor Johnson for about 5 to 10 minutes, an opening statement. Then Kevin is going to make his statement. Then they are going to respond to each other, and we'll take it from there. And then
Great,
there'll be time
great.
for you guys to ask questions, which we'd like to have a lot of that time left over.
You know, I think Sally pretty well said it. The notion that we're going to debate over whether marijuana is going to be legal or not is like having a debate over whether the sun is going to come up tomorrow morning or not. It is going to come up tomorrow morning, and we are going to legalize marijuana. And that's a really good thing. As governor of New Mexico, where I came at this from was the notion that I wanted to really crack down on drinking and driving, the notion that people would be on the highways and drinking and driving, and I wanted to crack down on that. Well, as a result of that, come to find out that half of what we spend on law enforcement, half of what we spend in the courts, and half of what we spend in the prisons is drug-related, and that still remains the case today. We're still arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country on drug-related crime. Half of those arrests are for marijuana alone, so 900,000 arrests still today for marijuana-related crime, and 90% of all those arrests are for possession only. So the notion that we're going after the pusher is a ridiculous notion. So I wanted to really take a hard look at the war on drugs. I wanted to look at a hard look at marijuana. And first thing that came at me was, you know, that statistically speaking, alcohol kills 100,000 people a year. Statistically speaking, legal prescription painkillers, narcotic-based, kill 100,000 people a year. 450,000 people a year die from their use of tobacco. That's what's attributed to tobacco. Well, come to find out, based on those numbers, I would have thought that cocaine and heroin overdose, I would have thought that that number would have been somewhere in the vicinity of 100,000 people. I would have just thought that. Well, come to find out, it's 8,000 people. And then I get the response immediately, well, it's 8,000 people because it's against the law. Well, gee, not actually. Actually, prohibition, quality, quantity unknown, is what kills. So arguably, if these products were legal, you wouldn't even have 8,000 deaths from cocaine or heroin. So really, really very, very misleading. I am now the president and CEO of High. We're a publicly traded company in the marijuana space, and the notion is to brand the best marijuana products in the world under the brand name High. This is something that I'm terribly excited about. Right now I'm being asked if I'm going to run for president again in 2016. It's something I would like to do, but I don't know why I would want to give up my dream job as the president of High to become the president of the United States, and I just have to tell you that up front. When medical marijuana first came on the scene, you know what? I supported it from the very get-go because the notion of not sending people to jail and allowing people to use their marijuana, that appealed to me. But I really thought that medical marijuana was a ruse. Come to find out, it's not at all. When you look at CBD oil, when you look at medical marijuana applications, when you look at the fact that CBD oil in conjunction with THC is a direct competitor to legal prescription painkillers, opiate-based, that kill 100,000 people a year. There are no known deaths to marijuana, and I mean from the use of marijuana. And I'm sure that it will be headlines across the country when the first person dies from known use of marijuana. But you've got marijuana, cannabis, that directly competes with legal prescription painkillers, antidepressants, CBD oil. This is Sanjay Gupta, who all of a sudden declares that, holy cow, CBD oil helps out kids with epilepsy, helps out MS, helps Parkinson's. When you look at CBG, which is in the cannabis plant, it has unbelievable possibilities when it comes to Alzheimer's. CBD oil, back to CBD oil, is a suppressant when it comes to appetite and also smoking. So just on and on and on. If the cannabis plant were discovered tomorrow in the Amazon, it would be hailed as the most wonderful discovery in humankind. But of course, that's not the case. And then on the recreational side, and I have smoked marijuana. I want to be very clear about that. I have an aversion to smoking, and by the way, high products will not be smoked products. They will be ingested products. They'll be sublingual. So at the heart of our product base is a sativa lozenge, which the first time I tried one of these a couple of years ago, I was struck by a couple of things. One was, why would anybody smoke marijuana given this is an alternative? And then number two, wow, this is really, really, really pleasant. But I have always maintained that legalizing marijuana will lead to less overall substance abuse because people will find it as such a safer alternative than alcohol. And I really believe with the legalization of marijuana, and we're seeing it right now, that with the refinements coming along with the legalization of marijuana, that it'll also be a direct competitor against harder drugs. I think that I would like to relay to you a story that I had. I believe that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related, and that is not to discount the problems with use and abuse. And I'm sure we'll hear about use and abuse and the problems associated with it. Let's not discount those problems, but let's recognize that those problems exist regardless of what happens. But in the case, Governor of New Mexico, judges in Portland, Oregon, they wanted to meet with me. They wanted to tell me some things. I had no idea what this meeting was going to be about. This was in year 2000. They meet with me, and what they say was, Governor Johnson, we're here to support what you're saying. We think that what you're saying is right on. We would like to share with you, though, a story that you might pass on to others that they might better understand the drug issue. They said that the real boogeyman drug out there is methamphetamine. But what they said is methamphetamine is the best example we can think of a prohibition drug. It's cheap and it's easy to make, and so the consequences fall disparagingly on the poor, but it really does a number on people's behavior. What they said was, and they said, we're not suggesting the following take place, but what they said was, if cocaine were legal, these people would be using cocaine instead of methamphetamine without the negative behavioral impact. Now, I happen to know that that also, I think that that's true. But wouldn't it be great if the government told the truth, and in the case of cocaine, told us all the truth, which is you do cocaine and you literally put holes in your heart and you're going to end up dying from heart failure at some point. So the cocaine user, the stereotypical cocaine user, is Whitney Houston, who dies before she's 50 years old. That's prohibition speaking. So in 1999, I was the highest government official, governor, U.S. congressperson, U.S. senator, to come out in favor of legalizing drugs, legalizing marijuana, and then looking at all the other drugs and looking at harm reduction strategies regarding all the other drugs. And we're not going to go from legalizing marijuana to legalizing all drugs. I think we're going to go to legalizing marijuana, understanding. We're going to take quantum leaps forward as a country, understanding these issues, understanding substance abuse, and then I think we move forward from there. But I did that in 1999, and I have to tell you, today, 2014, 57% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. In that group that I just mentioned, governors, U.S. senators, U.S. congresspersons, not a one supports legalizing marijuana. Not one. It is the biggest disconnect between public policy and public opinion that I can possibly think of. I'll stop.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate, Governor, you agreeing to do this, and Sally for hosting, and I want to thank the Buckley program for having me. It's an honor to be in front of you. I'm actually not going to be talking about the harms of marijuana. You don't need to listen to a former governor or a policy wonk like me to get those answers. You should read frankly, the position papers of the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Institutes of Health, which, by the way, all support my position, are all against legalization and think that marijuana is a public health program. They acknowledge the issues of the adolescent brain and how you're more vulnerable to addiction when you're younger, and also how today's marijuana is certainly not the marijuana that maybe some folks in Woodstock smoked, that it's actually having much more damaging effects for driving and other things. But I don't want to get into those details. You should not take our word for it. But what I do want to talk about is how and what legalization is all about. And I really do hope we can separate the discussion, actually multiple discussions between the medical use of marijuana, decriminalization, and there are many versions of that, and legalization, because they're very different things. They often get blended together, and it makes for a very confusing discussion. This isn't a debate about medical marijuana, so I'll just get this out of the way to begin with. I fully agree that marijuana has medicinal properties. I agree that they should be researched, they should be available now. In fact, as we speak, 600 kids through a special FDA program are getting a CBD oil, which is manufactured under good manufacturing practices and tested for bacteria and those kinds of things. That's happening. I am critical of my former bosses. I wish that they need to happen faster. I think there are hurdles that are present with the studying the medicinal use that we should overcome. I think the governor and I would agree on those aspects. But I do want to avoid the extremes in the debate, as Dr. Sattel talked about with the organization I helped to start. I think that oftentimes we are given a false dichotomy in this discussion. That false dichotomy says we have two choices in drug control, or in this case marijuana, or really for all drugs. Either lock them up, focus on incarceration, punitiveness, arrest records, criminal issues, or legalize. And I reject that false dichotomy. I would agree with the governor that we should not be arresting folks for low-level use. We shouldn't give people criminal records so that if they make a mistake when they're 20, when they're 30 and they're applying for a job, they have to check yes on the box of whether or not they were arrested or they were in prison. Bad use of police resources and court resources to focus on low-level users. But it is a very different issue entirely to leap from that, and even admitting that the war on drugs has not worked, to leap from that to the kind of position that the governor takes and others take in terms of where we are in Colorado and Washington and where we might be going in other states. I think that is way too big of a leap to take, and I think really the example of our legal drugs, and I'm glad the governor brought up the fact that, alcohol and tobacco and psychotherapeutics kill way more people than all of our illegal drugs combined. I think that's a perfect example of what legalization is about, and it's about one word. And that's not about civil liberties. It's not about getting rid of the war on drugs. It is about money. And I'm glad the governor revealed his interest in this, in his business interest. Legalization is about making money. And it is frankly about that, just like it's been like that for the tobacco and alcohol industries. As you probably know from the econ classes you take, 80% of the alcohol consumption in this country is essentially harmless consumption. It's the 20% of consumption that's problematic. And that 20% is responsible for over 80% of the profits of the alcohol and tobacco industries. Okay, it's why, by the way, pharmaceuticals the same reason. It's why Purdue Pharma went to Kentucky and West Virginia and poorer places, more vulnerable, to get those, frankly, with fewer resources hooked on it. You go for the most vulnerable. It's why when you're in New Haven, there are 8 times as many liquor stores in poor communities of color in this state than there are in upper class communities. That's the same thing if you go to Baltimore or spend time where I'm from in LA. And so the issue is you have a massive industry focusing on the most vulnerable with the least access to housing, healthcare, and everything else, and you increase your bottom line. And legalization of marijuana has nothing to do with restoring civil rights. It has nothing to do with getting people out of prison, because if it did, the law would not be a legalization law in Colorado. It would be a plain decrim law. It would be a law saying we're not going to arrest people for low-level amounts, we're not going to have criminal records, you can grow your own, etc. But the reason the laws are not that way, and the reason why we already have a massive marijuana industry selling things like gummy bears, cookies, and chocolates that are 10 servings for one candy bar that are causing deaths, whether they're on the roads or whether they are accidents. The reason those are happening is because you have a massive industry. And saying nobody has died from marijuana, I agree with the governor, it's not an overdose. But you don't overdose from tobacco either. You do not, with that logic, nobody dies of cigarette smoking. Now, it's ridiculous to say that. We know 450,000 people a year die from cigarettes from the indirect exposure due to usually lung cancer. Marijuana, to say that marijuana doesn't kill anybody, the issue of driving while intoxicated, the issue of the accidents that we're seeing in Colorado that have already killed people, and the other kinds of things that new potent marijuana is causing, I think is to be disingenuous. And make no mistake about it, again, if we discovered cannabis in the Amazon tomorrow, yeah, maybe we would hail it as a great medicinal plant. But that cannabis in the Amazon would not be the cannabis that's around today. Would not be the massively manipulated marijuana, which in no way resembles the original cannabis plant, let alone the cannabis that many of your parents, who might not want to admit it, might have smoked at Woodstock or the Summer of Love, okay? And that's because with our wonderful agricultural techniques, made in the USA marijuana is so much better than made in Mexico or anywhere else because we've learned to manipulate the active ingredient. We manipulate the THC, we have artificial levels of THC, and the things like the governor and I would agree that have medicinal properties like CBD, cannabidiol, which are helping some kids with epilepsy, those things have been bred out of modern marijuana. So already we have high potent THC marijuana that does not resemble marijuana that you find sort of wildly growing somewhere. It's manipulated here, and already we are seeing a massive new industry. And so I really could care less if the governor or anyone else here really, adult, 50-year-old guy who's working wants to blow some steam off once a week, once a month after work, wants to smoke some pot in his basement. I could care less about that. I don't think the police should be going after him. I think it's a bad use of resources to be focusing on that person at all. But that is not what legalization is about. It's not about the responsible use of a couple of joints a week. It is about creating a massive industry, just like the tobacco and alcohol and prescription drug industry, in order to hook the most number of people with all kinds of innovative branding, marketing, and different products that are available. And in Colorado, we are already seeing that. And that is why the support for legalization has fallen dramatically, both nationwide, according to the most recent poll, and in Colorado. In fact, a 17% decline in Coloradans who actually agree with legalization, even though they voted for it 2 years ago. Because, the soccer mom from Littleton, Colorado is realizing that, she voted for this thinking it would get rid of drug cartels and fund schools. She's waking up to the grim reality of today that this is about a massive marketing, massive businesses making money, and frankly, schools are not better off. You have a lottery here in this state, I think. How's that doing? Has that solved your public education problems? Do alcohol and tobacco taxes pay for the damage of those two drugs? So people are realizing that. Just final point to make is the black market also, by the way, the underground market is alive and well in Colorado. In fact, thriving in Colorado for one simple reason, and that's because they can easily undercut the government's taxed price. And so the joke in Colorado now is the only people who go to recreational stores are tourists and those with AARP cards, because you can buy your marijuana for half the price from, frankly, the underground market for pot, as many of you might know, I don't know if you do, but if you might know, is generally nonviolent. And so it's much easier to get marijuana from that source, much cheaper than it is, frankly, from a legal tax source. So Colorado's not even seeing the taxes come in like they had predicted. So I don't think good public policy can fit on a bumper sticker. I don't think it's legalized. I don't think it's lock them up. I haven't ever used the term war on drugs in a serious way. I don't know really who has anymore. I think 1986 called and they want their phrase back. It's just not something that's used. But it's used if you want to sort of drum up this antagonism and present this false dichotomy that our only two choices are an alcohol model, which has been an utter disaster from a public health point of view, a cigarette model, or a model of kind of locking people up and whatnot. So I think we can do a lot better than either of those two things, and maybe we can get into what that might look like later in the debate.
Governor Johnson, to respond.
Well, let me speak to a few things. Impairment. First of all, impairment needs to be established when it comes to marijuana. We don't want people getting impaired and getting behind the wheel of a car. But if I may relay to you right now the impairment issue in Colorado and Washington State. In Colorado and Washington State, 5 nanograms of marijuana in your system is considered impairment. Okay? It's considered DUI. Ross Rigobaldi, and I'm butchering his last name, Ross Rigobaldi, the Canadian snowboarder, first Olympic gold medalist in the snowboard in Vancouver, won a gold medal in the giant slalom. Right after his giant slalom run to win the gold medal, he tested at 17 nanograms in his bloodstream. Now, point is that 17 nanograms is not impairment, but certainly 5 nanograms is not impairment. Or what they're saying is that you can be 3 times the DUI limit in Colorado and Washington State and win an Olympic gold medal in the snowboard. Just wanted to point that out to you. Secondly, what legalization brings is the following. And I was in Alaska about 3 weeks ago to promote their ballot initiative 2, which is to legalize marijuana, and the microphone stuck in my face. You represent big marijuana. We don't like big marijuana. What do you bring to the table as big marijuana? Hi. Well, let me make this analogous to the ending of the prohibition of alcohol. We bring Tanqueray gin to Alaska. Are you going to continue to make bathtub gin in Alaska when you have Tanqueray available? I doubt it. And I'll bet there are some products in Alaska that qualify as best, and we would love to label those products to be able to sell those products in other places. What legalization brings is it brings responsible labeling to these products. It brings responsible quality, quantity of these products to the marketplace. Makes it safer. 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related. Quality, quantity, unknown. That's what kills. And then legalization versus decriminalization. Look, the problem with decriminalization is it turns its back on more than half the problem, which is in a decriminalized environment, what you have is okay, it's okay for me to possess and it's okay for me to use. So literally what you have is a situation at a social gathering where John yells across the room to Jimmy, "Hey, Jimmy, you know, marijuana's been decriminalized and we all know you sell it and we need some now, man." And you know what? Jimmy gets arrested and goes to jail because law enforcement now has shifted all of its resources from possession to those that sell small amounts of marijuana. And I've always believed that the profile of the pusher is so malaligned. The person who sells drugs is simply the person who yesterday was a user, who now gets thrust into the seller's role because the user has been arrested and has gone to jail. And we are really, really effective at finding the seller of drugs and, in fact, sending them off to jail. People in jail are people who have sold drugs on numerous occasions and been caught doing that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. In fact, that hits my main point, which is we are not spending our current time, even if we left current law the same, going after low-level users. I agree. People that are in jail or prison are those that are selling. We are arresting, there's no doubt about it, and oftentimes giving them a record, which I think we should change. But what is actually the top drug we arrest for today? Nonviolent offense related to this drug. I don't know if anybody can imagine. I'm hearing cocaine, I'm seeing heroin. Actually, it's alcohol, a legal drug. There are 3 times as many people arrested for nonviolent alcohol offenses. I'm talking using in public, drinking in public, selling to kids, DWI. Those 3 categories, many more than the 1.8 million number quoted earlier. Again, that's because there's just so many more users of it. And again, the reason we have so many more deaths from our legal drugs is exactly, and the reason why I think it's good that our cocaine and heroin deaths are so low, is because when something is legal, even when it's tightly controlled, like things like OxyContin and psychotherapeutics, where you have to have $1 million education technically to dispense them, those are the most used and abused because they're legal and they're available. Nobody can doubt when something is legal, sold on the open market and available, normalization goes up, and in this country, that accompanies with mass commercialization and promotion. Okay, we may go to China to manufacture in this country, but if you want to learn how to market and promote something, you go to Madison Avenue. That is what we are known for. And that is why, by the way, you all know, this college level crowd knows the brand Smirnoff, which is weird when you think about what Smirnoff, what a stodgy alcohol brand that is. Well, the reason you know about it is because 10 years ago, they engaged in a campaign, essentially to Smirnoff Ice and to make products that exactly target your age. This is just one example. We can talk about Joe Camel. We can talk about all the kinds of advertising ploys that we've seen over the last 100 years. I also want to push back against this inevitability argument. I do not believe that legalization is inevitable at all, because I think the weight and the experience of legalization in Colorado is giving a lot of people second thoughts. It's why the gubernatorial debate last week had both gubernatorial candidates, including the incumbent Democrat, who's in charge of implementing legalization, saying that he thought legalization had been reckless. It's why you have the Republican calling for overall repeal, and why less than 50% of Coloradans now support what they voted for 2 years ago. It's because, folks, in theory, legalization is a lot prettier than in practice.
I would ask you how many times...
Yeah, let me finish this, and then we can do questions. So I think that in practice, we're not seeing it be as good. And then finally, on the issue of impairment, I don't doubt that snowboarder had 17 nanograms. That actually points to the fact that impairment is different for everybody. I mean, you know, so if clearly if he had 17 nanograms and did that well, he was a very experienced marijuana user.
He should have got a double gold medal.
Yeah,
no, that's right.
No,
he should have.
The point is, he's used to smoking marijuana. Is what that means scientifically. There's a scientific reason. It's not because he's, you know, because if somebody who had never used marijuana versus if he had never used.
So how would you address the 5 nanograms?
No, I agree. I agree with you. The nanogram, finding levels, I totally agree with you, is actually very difficult to do. You sort of pull it out of the air. By the way, you know, our .08 alcohol level is not a scientific standard of impairment for alcohol. It's a political standard. It's the same reason our drugs are internalized in different ways. It's why we all know a smoker who smoked for 80 years and died of old age, and we all know a smoker who smoked for 5 years and died of lung cancer. Everybody internalizes these drugs differently. My point, and I'm agreeing with the governor, is that it actually is very difficult to establish impairment. It's one of the many problems that comes along with marijuana legalization, because now you have somebody saying, hey, I'm at work, and I'm, you know, above or below some arbitrary standard, and yeah, I had an accident, but it had nothing to do with the fact that I was high, because, you know, I'm normally high, and so I know how to. It's all of these kinds of problems with the workplace, with road safety, with all kinds of things that I think we do care about, that I think are going to be very problematic. And the final thing I want to say is, you know, again, to have the position I'm taking is not to say that everybody who uses marijuana is going to get into a car crash, or everybody who uses is going to be dumb. Now, we know that the chances of IQ reduction are significantly increased, but it doesn't mean that every user that happens to. Well, we have a lot of things in society that are like that we don't tolerate. I'm not sure if you know what the chances are if you are drunk above .08, what your chances are of getting into a fatal car crash tonight is. I mean, think about that for a minute. It's about 1 in 1,000. Your chances of getting into dying in a crash if you don't wear a helmet or seatbelts are similar. So there are all sorts of things that, yeah, it's not like every single time. And I'm not here to say, you know, wave the reefer madness flag and say like, oh my God, you're using marijuana, you're going to use heroin tomorrow, and it's your life is over. Of course not. Plenty of successful people have used marijuana. But the point is, in our society now, is this something that we want to promote? Is this something we want to normalize? Is this something we want to commercialize and lend out to the market forces who are only there to make money and increase problematic use? I don't think so.
So, Governor, what do you say about, you mentioned the advantages, which, for what it's worth, make sense to me, about, you know, labeling and regulation so people know what they get, what they're getting. But there's that, and then there's the promotion. And that's, of course, what Kevin is really most concerned about, that it'll be promoted into, basically become a Smirnoff equivalent.
Well,
what about that, the promotion and advertising?
First thing, I would like to ask you, just for my own edification, how many times have you been to Colorado?
about 8 times this year, and last year a couple dozen times.
Yeah, well, I've been there that many times too, and we just have a different view of Colorado. Colorado is vibrant. Colorado is absolutely booming. It is a wonderful place.
I like Colorado. I'm not saying it's not a wonderful place.
Right,
I'm saying
and I'm telling
look
you,
at the effects of marijuana.
Well, look at the effects.
You
make it sound like Colorado is like the worst place in the world, and it's the best place in the world. I mean, it really is. It's terrific.
In the world.
You need to go to
Okay,
Colorado.
resolved. Colorado's a great place.
Yeah, we love Colorado. Big deal. My point is the long-term effects and what we're already beginning to see are not looking good in the neighborhoods that have these stores. That's all.
Well, so I haven't had a drink of alcohol in 26 years. For me personally, when I smoked marijuana for the first time when I was 17 years old, this is so much safer than alcohol. It just doesn't seem to have any side effects whatsoever. So for me, promoting marijuana use is promoting a safer alternative than alcohol. It's promoting a safer alternative than currently illegal drugs that I think get abused. It's safer, and this is on the recreational side.
Safer on what level? The issue is marijuana.
All levels.
Oh,
All
really?
levels.
So,
Yeah.
so you're saying that for your lungs, it's safer to drink alcohol than smoke marijuana. You're saying for
No, well, see,
mental
I don't.
illness,
I have an
you're saying for
aversion to
mental
smoking.
illness.
Also,
Well, hold on.
high
You're
products are
okay.
taken
Well,
sublingually. I want you to know.
I'm glad that that's
sublingually.
the case, but 99% of the marijuana market is smoked. So let's be very clear.
No,
about
no,
what we're
no.
talking about
Actually,
in reality.
you're not understanding
Okay.
this. In
All right.
Colorado right now, 65% now of the recreational market is sublingual. It's not smoke, and
in
it's
the
moving
United States,
fast.
you're comparing alcohol to marijuana as absolute terms in the United States or worldwide. You're not saying
No,
in Colorado.
Colorado.
You're saying in Colorado, marijuana is better for you, but not outside of Colorado. No,
No, I'm saying
generally.
that 65% of the marijuana
So-
being consumed recreationally, being sold recreationally, is edible, is not smoke.
Wonderful.
And
but
if you look at
99% of the consumption is smoke. So I don't care.
yeah,
what's
well,
being
that's
sold.
because it's not legal, and the only thing available for you is smoke. That's
Well,
why.
hold on. So what I'm saying is, when you look at alcohol versus marijuana, they are different, Governor. So
They are.
Yes. So
Marijuana
they
is much
absorb-
safer than
no,
alcohol.
They
Much
absorb,
safer.
They absorb in different ways. First of all, marijuana absorbs in your fatty tissue.
That's
in
right.
In your,
That's
your
right. That's why
body for
you
30 days.
end up with
alcohol. It's
17 nanograms in your system, and you win an Olympic gold medal.
And with alcohol, it's not in those fatty tissues. It's liquid. The other issue is marijuana and alcohol. Obviously, for your lungs, marijuana is worse. For your liver, alcohol is worse. For violence, alcohol is probably worse.
Probably worse? Probably?
For education. For educational outcomes, mental illness, IQ. There is no doubt in the scientific literature in terms of marijuana's relative risk versus alcohol. And so
And
I
what
don't
is
think
that? What is
comparing
that?
them, meaning marijuana is worse for you when it comes to mental illness and when it comes to learning. Well, okay.
That's
So- all right.
just
Well, you
preposterous.
should look at
It's
the-
preposterous.
Look at the
why
American medical-
Why do you think we have
You
legalized
should look at
marijuana in
the
Colorado? Why is
American-
the majority?
Because we have billionaires who want to make more money from legal marijuana. That you all
There-
should
this
look
is not-
at.
this is not
look
a
at the
billionaire
scientific
situation.
literature. Hold on. Look at the scientific literature from the AMA, from every major medical association. Don't do a Google search. Do a Medline search. And if you don't know what a Medline search is, Google it. And figure out. Read the literature yourself. This issue about, by the way, what's worse, I think is also not even. Alcohol is legal not because it's better for you. So even conceding for a minute in absolute terms that alcohol is worse for a minute. Let's take that down. Let's take that argument down for a second. That is not an argument to legalize marijuana. That's an argument to say, wait a minute, look at the damage that alcohol has already brought
Let me be very
with
clear.
its legalization.
Let me be very clear. Marijuana is pleasant for millions and millions of Americans every single day.
So is heroin. The pleasantness is not the level that we look at when we're determining public policy. Heroin is very pleasant. You ever had legal heroin like Dilaudid, if you've ever been in a hospital or something before? I mean, those are wonderful things. That's the issue of being pleasant, and that's why people take heroin, because it feels really good, and that's why they take marijuana. I agree. I'm not saying it's unpleasant for people. That's not the standard for public policy. What I'm saying is, why legalize something and go down a path of normalization and increased consumption, at a time when, frankly, I don't really think America can afford, frankly, going down even more than we already are in science, math, reading, and all these other things. When you look at marijuana's connection to educational outcomes, there's no reason to legalize
if we're talking
it.
about educational outcomes, we should be looking at free market approaches when it comes to educational outcomes. And And
Fine.
that's a whole nother topic on
Happy to
itself.
look at that.
What do you think the role of, I mean, when you talk about, and here's where I feel,
Sure.
well, I'm the doctor here,
Sorry,
so
yeah.
let me,
Sure, please, please, please.
I
please.
did want to say two things. These things do get bandied about in the debate about mental illness and IQ. And maybe Kevin and I will have our own little debate afterwards about this. But the IQ study, unless there's been a subsequent one, you're probably referring to the New Zealand study?
One of them, yeah.
There's really only, I believe, one study that attempted to look at people from age 18 and then again
38.
at 38. That sample was quite small. There were 38
Right.
who were 38 years old. That's a very small sample in which to look at an IQ
Sure.
20 years later. And in a fascinatingly, they found that it was only verbal IQ that deteriorated, not mathematics. So it's a study.
But if you look at the dropouts,
it's worth
and if
looking
you look
at.
at the other, yeah.
It's just worth looking
Yeah.
at. It's not replicated
sure.
yet. Okay. And the other thing about mental health is are you referring to schizophrenia?
And psychosis.
That marijuana probably accelerates, this is still a debate in psychiatry, probably accelerates the onset of schizophrenia in people who were predisposed. It's not that clear that it's causal. Anyway, that's important
definitely.
as
I mean,
well.
Yeah, look, I don't know what is causal. I mean, obviously, we're talking about strong associations. I'm talking about schizophrenia studies from the 80s.
And speaking
going
about
until now.
that's actually, frankly, a lead into my real point. Was speaking of associations, how much do you think? I don't doubt for a minute that young kids who smoke a lot of dope could have worse, on average, worse educational and occupational attainment. But how much do you think that excessive smoking at that age then is a marker for a more general kind of troubled adolescence?
Obviously.
And that's the problem.
Obviously, I think there are multiple things that are connected, but I don't think marijuana helps. And I think that our example with alcohol, of the fact that alcohol, first of all, is used much more widely among kids than marijuana today. And the reason is because of the normalization and promotion and marketing that's going on. So that's all I'm saying is warning against that. It doesn't mean that if somebody smokes marijuana, they're going to be schizophrenic or have lower
Oh, I
IQ.
know.
It just means
I know
that.
You were clear.
What do we want to, in terms of the chances, what are we willing to bargain for? What kind of chances are we willing to go for? And is it worth the fact that we would be legalizing for the 7.5% of Americans that smoke regularly, whereas 60-some% drink regularly, and still, even after every single public education campaign you can imagine, between 20 and 25% of people smoke regularly. I just don't see the argument of wanting to bring 7.5% up to par with our smoking or alcohol rates.
I'd like to dispute the notion that only 7.5% of the population uses marijuana. I think that when in the 70s you were called and you were said, do you smoke marijuana? You answered that question by saying, well, of course, everybody smokes marijuana. Today, when you get that question on the phone, no way. No way. Because you don't want to.
I thought it was so mainstream. Why would you be saying no way if we're about to legalize?
Because we arrest 1.8 million people a year in this country, and it's very real. It's very real. Are the police going to come and knock down the door? So I think that it's a much lower number that admit marijuana use in this country.
Let's say
than
it's off
actually
by a massive factor, like 50%, which would render the entire. I mean, you could not have a survey off by that. Let's say imagine that would make it 10%.
What do you say about the fact that you now are? And by the way, when I started this debate in '99, and I say I started the debate, it had been going on, but when I entered into the debate in 1999, 35% of Americans supported legalizing marijuana.
Sure, yeah.
The case that I made at that point was that 65% of Americans want to put 35% of Americans in jail. Today, right now, you have 57% of Americans supporting legalization. In essence, 43% are saying to 57 that if you smoke marijuana, you're breaking the law and you're going to go to jail. I can't think of any other disconnect in public policy. I mean, when it comes to crime and ending up in jail, violent crime, domestic abuse, you name it. I think when it comes to crimes that you should go to jail for, generally you have a 98%, 95% to 5% difference in, yes, you should go to jail if you hit your spouse. But here it is, now we have 43% of the population saying to 57% of the population, you belong in jail, ultimately, for what you're espousing.
But the reason that the disconnect there, Governor, is I think you're assuming that, again, it's this false dichotomy, that the 43%, and I think it's higher than that, especially the recent polls showing legalization slipping, but let's just say for argumentation.
Well, what do you say?
Hold on, 43%, fine. That 43% that it's not necessarily that they're saying we want you to go to jail. There's the 43% is simply saying we don't want to see it legally available, marketed, promoted, commercialized.
And ultimately, when you carry that argument forward, though, ultimately what you end up with is putting people in jail. And look,
no, you don't have to put people in jail for
well,
the
that's
level
the public policy that exists today.
But you can change it without having to go to legalization. That is my whole point.
Yeah,
Well, and I think this is the route. I think this is the route that people are taking. This is the route that people have recognized. And by the way, it's never going to be legal for kids to do pot. And are kids going to still do pot? Absolutely. Yeah. But you know, when it came to my own kids, and statistically, one out of two kids do pot. All right, that's statistically speaking.
Try it once, yeah.
Well, try it once. Under the wrong
Sure.
set of circumstances, you're in jail. So the message to my kids was, you know, look, the worst thing that I fear for you doing any of these products, first of all, outside of marijuana, quality, quantity unknown, I really wouldn't touch it because we're talking about prohibition. But when it comes to marijuana, the worst thing that's going to happen is that you might get caught and get arrested and be precluded from opportunities that exist in this country. So my message to my kids was, I love you both. I love you. So if you find yourself impaired, give me a call. I will come up. I will pick you up wherever you're at. No questions asked because I love you. That's the message that parents should be sending. And I think when parents talk about the fact that marijuana should be criminal, what they're saying is they're issuing a sentence to one of their two children or two of their four children that they're going to end up in jail for their actions. And I don't think any parent really wants that. And I think we've come to that recognition.
But you said earlier that they're not in jail, that it's the sellers. So I'm still trying to, you know, and you were right about that. When you look at the statistics, the vast majority of people who are smoking marijuana are not in jail or prison. Go ahead.
You should put me
Please.
in the middle.
Yes.
Anyway, it's almost 5, and we want to have people ask questions, but I do want to give you guys a chance to sum up. So what if you, if I suggest,
Sure.
spend your 5 minutes on what you would do, and Dr. Johnson, Governor, maybe spend your time, if you don't mind me suggesting, on what lessons we can take at this time from Colorado and Washington to improve the state of legalization as it exists. Okay.
Well, again, I think it's pretty obvious. I'd reject the false dichotomy is what I would do. I would not have scare tactics. I don't think we need that. I would make sure that mandatory minimum sentences, and we didn't talk about other drugs, although, Governor, I'm glad you revealed your preference to legalize all drugs. By the way, I also think that is the ultimate goal here with marijuana. It doesn't stop at marijuana, and I think that's pretty obvious. But what I would say for all drugs and marijuana is that we don't need harsh sentences, so we don't need mandatory minimums. I would give judges discretion. I would make sure that all circumstances and cases are looked at. So if you're affiliated with a drug dealer or you picked up the phone at the wrong time, you're not the one going to prison for 20 years. Certainly those travesties have happened. I'd make sure we don't have that. I'd make sure we don't have criminal records for possession. I'd make sure we also don't, think it's okay to publicly use, and I would issue fines and citations for those kinds of things. But I would also make sure we had adequate prevention. I'd make sure we have adequate treatment. I mean, it's crazy that the richest country in the world does not have adequate treatment. And marijuana addiction, by the way, is real. It's real for 1 in 6 16-year-olds dependents if you start when you're 16. If you start marijuana when you're 14, that number is 1 in 4. If you start when you're over 21, that number is 1 in about 11. So it is real for millions of Americans, the need for treatment on marijuana. I would make sure that that was widely available, but I wouldn't go down the path of frankly, the civil libertarian argument of saying that, essentially we should legalize this and let it go to market forces, because I think market forces have taught us in terms of, drugs that do impair, like alcohol. By the way, tobacco, although it kills more people, of course, doesn't impair, and so you can drive and smoke or go to school and smoke a cigarette. You're not impaired like you are with marijuana, and that way marijuana is worse for you than tobacco. In other ways, tobacco is obviously worse for you than marijuana, but I would make sure that we don't go down that path, because I think what we're seeing in Colorado, and Washington's sort of new, but in Colorado already is a little bit of a buyer's remorse, and we'll see what happens over the next few years. None of us have crystal balls to know what's going to happen with legalization, but I think this is going to reverse course in the next few years, despite the money and the interests that are behind it.
Right now on the ballot in this November is the legalization of marijuana in Oregon and Alaska, and apparently it's leading by about 20 points in each state.
Not in Alaska.
Well, we can take a wager over this
I'm
if you
happy
like. Right now, marijuana is labeled as a Class 1 narcotic. I wanted to point out something that you may come across in your lives, and that is this CBD oil. CBD oil, in and of itself, does not contain THC. But just as non-alcoholic beer doesn't contain alcohol, it does contain alcohol. It contains very, very small amounts of alcohol that no matter how much alcohol you drink, you could never get high off of non-alcoholic beer. CBD oil, although it does not contain THC, it does contain THC. It contains microscopic doses of THC, so it is listed as a class 1 narcotic. I talked to a molecular biologist, a researcher, a couple of months ago in Seattle, and he said that he was doing work with a young woman who was having 300 epileptic seizures a week. Gave her 4 units of CBD, and her epileptic seizures dropped to 50 a week. He added 1 unit of THC to the 4 units of CBD, and her epileptic seizures dropped to 8 a week. The point is we can't just embrace CBD because it doesn't contain THC. It doesn't tell the whole story. There's a much bigger story out there. Another untold story out there is that there are tens of millions of Americans that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens, but today are convicted felons and are, in fact, precluded from opportunities that this country avails those that aren't convicted felons. Real untold story after the prohibition of alcohol ended was the pardoning that went on, and this is a process that we should also be engaged in this country. And then lastly, the notion of treatment. You know, treatment is a great model if you're seeking treatment. If you have substance abuse problems and you want to seek out treatment and treatment is available, that's when treatment is successful. But I'm afraid that what we have in this country right now, what we've had is a forced treatment model where you have a choice. You can either go to prison or you can either go to treatment. And so in 100 out of 100 cases, I would like to be able to offer that alternative, treatment as opposed to incarceration. But does it work? Absolutely not. And I'll just end with the story that as governor, trash was a big thing, meaning I thought we should pick up trash. So I'm involved in picking up trash on the weekend. There's about 30 kids picking up trash all around me. And before long, they identified me as the Gov. And they were all kids picking up trash there because they were in drug treatment. They were in drug treatment. And they all pretty well then gathered around me. And one kid says, "Governor, we're all here because we've been caught smoking marijuana a number of times. And if we're caught again, we're going to go to jail. And so we're here, and we're going to stay clean, Governor, for the whole time that we're in treatment because otherwise we will go to jail. But we just want you to know, we all love smoking marijuana. And as soon as this whole treatment thing is over with, we're going to go back to smoking marijuana." And he shared with me his American dream, which is to get married, buy a house, sit out on the patio on an afternoon, and smoke a joint with his kids. That was his American dream. Well, Governor, when the judge asks us, "Are we going to ever smoke marijuana again?" we all get up and we say, "No, Judge, we're never going to smoke marijuana again." But Governor, you need to know that we're all going to smoke marijuana again because we love smoking marijuana. And there are a lot of people in that category. And the alternative to providing that access is ultimately locking those people up. And that is the model that we have in this country.
Okay, I'm going to move to questions now. Do you want to come up to the microphone? Looks like you can.
The Oprah.
Okay,
Yes, you
yeah.
can. You should walk around.
If anybody has questions, yeah.
Just, young lady.
Hi, my name is Leslie. Sorry, that was a little loud.
No.
Thank you both for coming. Dr. Sabet, I think I'd like to direct my question to you. I'm from Mexico, so I kind of look at this debate on drugs from a reducing drug-related violence, reducing cartel violence. It seemed to me that you didn't believe that there were significant benefits from legalizing drugs. You talked about how the Colorado black market is still very much booming. I was wondering if you really believe that there are no significant benefits from that point of view.
No, obviously there are benefits and negatives of every public policy. I think it's, as Sally said earlier, it matters what value you ascribe, to what benefits in terms of where you're going to fall on the spectrum. To the issues of Mexico, the benefits of legalizing cannabis in a few states or even nationwide, the benefit to Mexico, I think, would be minuscule. Now, if you would have to, though, in terms of getting rid of cartels, that's because less than 20% of cartel revenue comes from marijuana. They make plenty of money, most of their money, from the expensive drugs, cocaine, heroin, to some extent methamphetamine, really human trafficking, issues of sex slavery, piracy, internet crimes, personal, identity theft. That's where the money is. So I think we'd have to be sort of prepared to legalize all of those things. I know that's sort of what the governor has implied, but we'd have to make the price of methamphetamine or cocaine per dose essentially at the cost of production in order to undercut the black market. The cost of production for crack, for a hit of crack, would be about 5 cents. So if we would be prepared to do that for all age groups, by the way, because you're going to have a black market if you make it illegal for those 21 or over, because someone under 21 is going to want it. In fact, that's the majority of the initiation market. So I think it's a very simplistic thing to say that the problems in Mexico are solved with, what's most called for, marijuana legalization, or even to a more extreme extent, all drug legalization, because I think the issues in Mexico are so much more fundamental than that. I would say let's look at restoring faith in institutions and, for example, having a functional healthcare system first, a functional education system first, a functional social welfare and housing system, which I don't think, unfortunately, exists in Mexico. And I think you need to focus really on building democracy, building faith in institutions, law and order, also law enforcement, security. And I don't think certainly legalizing marijuana in the United States is going to do that, even if you legalize meth and cocaine at 5 cents a dose, which I think we both agree there's absolutely no appetite to do that. We're going to be far from solving those endemic problems in Mexico.
Oh, this young lady.
So we've touched, my name is Elizabeth. We've touched a little bit on impairment, which I think we already sort of have the legal structures for, if not the science, even if the science is a bit shaky. But with the issue of addiction, one of my concerns is that comparing the legalization to marijuana and sort of the progression to legalizing other drugs is sort of comparing apples and oranges. Cocaine addiction is a much different beast, and that turns the commercialization of that drug into a much different beast that would be focused on hooking users, which I think the governor would agree that being addicted to drugs is not the most pleasurable way to experience them. And so the innovation that would occur, I'm predicting, maybe, I don't know everything, but the innovation that would occur would be the enhancement of the addictive properties and not the pleasure. So how do both of you think we should
already there are companies in the marijuana space that are, in fact, the tobacco company manufacturer, the people that did the science for tobacco in terms of manipulating tar levels, which, as you guys are kind of young, but there was this big campaign like 10 or 15 years ago, like reduced tar is better for you, and then the FDA and others said that's totally wrong. But then again, you've been lying to us for 90 years. But okay, that same company with that same technology is now just bought into the marijuana space. That exact company, by the way, that lied to us for 70 years.
Which company is that?
I don't remember the name, but you can look it up. It's sort of manipulating the tar and the marijuana. And so they're already wanting to do that. Also, by the way, the third largest tobacco company in the world, and that's called Japan Tobacco International, JTI, JTI just bought the majority share in the, we didn't talk about e-cigarettes today, but we should have, in the technology which allows you to have a product that is an e-cigarette for either tobacco or marijuana interchangeably, same product, and that's from the tobacco industry. So we're seeing kind of the same thing that happened 100 years ago with the innovation in tobacco happening now with marijuana.
Governor?
Well, I will just say that is not anything that we even consider, the notion of enhancing products to make them addictive. It's not anything discussed, and I guess this is the big opportunity that we will have in the space, is to be to be responsible, to actually label things responsibly, to give out responsible direction regarding this. Maureen O'Dowd, Maureen Dowd, you probably all saw the article. Never done marijuana before. She buys 100.
Never had, but naive user, yeah.
You want to tell the story?
Go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
No, you can if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
She buys a 120 milligram bar. She'd never done marijuana before, and she started eating it, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and she ate the whole bar, and she found herself, with near-death experience, so she describes it. And yeah, that would be like a non-drinker going out and half a bottle of tequila. Well, in 8 minutes you consume half a bottle of tequila because nothing was happening. Well, anyway, we're about promoting responsible and use and labeling these products and that we will be associated with the best ingredients that we have on the planet with regard to all these products. So I guess we have a big opportunity.
I guess I just got to say, in terms of the argument of half a bottle of vodka, that's totally the wrong and unfair comparison, because what Maureen Dowd ate and what you can buy in Colorado is a chocolate bar that's this big. It's not a giant Toblerone, that you get at like Heathrow Airport or something. It's a Hershey. It's a bar that I don't know about any of you. I have a very hard time dividing a chocolate bar this big into 16 servings. That's kind of a difficult thing. And I think it's kind of, that's very different than saying half a bottle of vodka. Yeah, I can't do that. You've done it. Congratulations. But most people will eat it at usually 1 or 2 sittings. So, the idea that a chocolate bar like this is the equivalent of half a bottle. And the other thing I have to say is I'm glad, Governor Johnson, you're going to be promoting responsible use. But whenever I see the beer commercials that say, enjoy responsibly, it's really funny because if everybody enjoyed responsibly, like they're asking you to do, they wouldn't make any money. As I said before, they only make money out of the minority of the population who consumes irresponsibly. In other words, who consumes way more than what anybody would think is responsible. So I just think I'm glad you're doing it, Governor. It's going to be very difficult to make money because you're going to make money off of the people that are the heavy users.
Okay, I think we have time for definitely one more and maybe 2, depending on how quickly you guys go.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael. I have a question, related but separate questions for Dr. Sabet and Governor Johnson. Dr. Sabet, in different jurisdictions, the government has been very successful, and independent groups have been very successful in reducing smoking and stigmatizing smoking. Right. In Canada, the rates are much lower. In states like California, it's below 12%. Sure. Yeah. Do you believe that there is, in principle, a reason why this would not work with marijuana? And if so, could you perhaps sketch why that is? For Governor Johnson, many of these campaigns to stigmatize and reduce use of cigarettes have placed substantial restrictions on the advertising of cigarettes, or in the case of certain Canadian jurisdictions, even the display of cigarettes in stores. They cannot be seen, and one must ask for a particular brand to even receive any. Would you accept such restrictions along with a legalization package?
Do you want to go first?
Well, with regard to any framework that gets passed, I just think that ultimately we do want information. We do want information. We do want ingredients, and bottom line, responsible packaging. Ingredients listed, and be assured that the ingredients that are listed are in fact those that are in the package. And any requirement that exists to do that, we do not intend to get sideways with the law at all, and it's all about responsibility and offering, in our case, the best marijuana products that the world has to offer.
So with regards to tobacco, so tobacco has been legal forever. I mean, since the founding of this country, since we had the technology to manufacture tobacco, it has been legal, and use went way up in the beginning because kind of sounds familiar. It was touted as medical. We have asthma cigarettes. We had doctors saying that doctors prefer Camel over any other brand, and those kinds of things. I have a lecture that I do for my students that shows some of those ads from 70 years ago, which are amazing. And so anyway, we kind of gone up and down, but certainly it's been a very drastic reduction in tobacco use really since the lawsuit and the big kind of covering of the 80 years of deceit from the tobacco industry that people are finally realizing that they were tricked for almost a century. But the fact that it's legal is not the reason why we've had the reduction. That we've had the reduction in an environment, as you said, where tobacco is 100% stigmatized. I don't even know any smokers that frankly will admit that they enjoy smoking. I have a hard time, maybe there's a few, but it's hard to find smokers that even defend their activity, let alone defend the industry of the tobacco industry. I don't know if the person who raised their hand also defends the industry. It's very hard to do that. Most smokers don't even, they've been frankly marginalized, for better or worse, depending on where you think of this, but it's been greatly stigmatized, as you said. And so there isn't anybody saying smoking's good for you, or smoking's not that bad, or relative to meth, smoking is better for you. I mean, it is, but I haven't seen anybody talk about that. With marijuana, even though it's illegal, we have the opposite right now societal discussion. The societal discussion for marijuana is probably really good for you. Actually, it could be like a miracle plant to cure cancer and epilepsy. And in fact, it's really not that bad for you compared to A, B, and C. And it's actually, it's all about the government lying for 100 years. And so in that environment, we still have lower levels than tobacco overall. But in that environment, marijuana use isn't going to be going down. We shouldn't be surprised. In the last 5 years, it's gone up. And in the last 20 years, the daily use of high school seniors has tripled, and now 1 in 15 high school seniors use daily. That's a huge number, not as big as the late 70s, but bigger in the last 25 years. So that's because that stigma has been eroded, whereas with tobacco, that stigma is very, very strong.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of what we're here for.
One more.
One more? Oh, good, okay. I'm happy to do one more.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Sabet.
I don't know if I'm going to be happy after you ask the question, but let's see.
Yeah, so my question was sort of summed up as what's so bad about Smirnoff, right? Like there are plenty of things that I want in this world, right? I want to go on roller coasters, and so there are amusement parks. I want to drive a car, and so there are people who sell cars to me. Well, what if I want to get high? I mean, there are plenty of people in this room that want to get high, so why is the government even involved in this? I mean, there are plenty of things that are legal, that are risky, that we still say are legal because we have autonomy and we're responsible adults and we should be able to put whatever we want in our bodies.
Well, that goes to the, so you would extend your argument then for really for all drugs?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's at least intellectually consistent, and actually the governor is intellectually consistent on that, whereas most people say, well, this is about marijuana, not other drugs, so I'm glad you're talking about meth, coke, and everything else. I think the issue is, as a society, we have a social compact with each other, and we know that there are certain activities that increase risk to other people, and so when you come to school high or drive to school high because this is just what you like to do, that happens to affect other people. Now, it doesn't mean that every single time you do that, again, just like every single time you drive drunk, in fact, 1 out of 1,000 only, is when you're going to get into a fatal car crash. But we, as a society, have decided that we want to discourage that behavior. It doesn't mean that I want to, for your choice, I'm saying you should lock them up and put them in a cage. What I'm saying is, frankly, it's pretty easy to find marijuana now, so it's not like you're having a hard time, your civil liberties are being eroded now. You just admitted that you like smoking marijuana. You didn't say that from a jail cell. I would like to reduce the risk of you going to jail, and maybe you didn't go because of, whatever. I would like to reduce that risk, as it's very clear, but that is very different than adopting of the policy, which is not decrim, which is full legalization, which I'm saying in this country is tantamount to widespread promotion and commercialization, which I do think is harmful.
Governor, last word?
I think we've
You've made it.
Put a nail in the coffin. Thank you all very much.
So, thank you all very much for coming. Middle of the road, kinder, gentler treatment of users, and a radically new regime with responsible use. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.